It changes every year. Honestly, the more you grow, the tougher the hurdles, the tougher the lessons, the tougher the pressure. And now you also want to level up. You don't. Certain things are no longer good enough anymore. So it's mentally for me. I'm a huge advocate of therapy. Huge advocate. Even just after just taking stock, when I've de-rolled, I take a de-rolling trip. I After every project, when I de-roll out of that character, I know where I'm centered. It's either in the bush or under the ocean. I'm a diver, so I'll either just like do a diving trip to Mauritius, or I'll go to Delstrom, or I'll go to Kruger, and I will literally just have time with me, myself, God. My spirituality and faith is of the utmost, because when I'm in the deepest trenches, I almost like it's almost like you are trying to brainwash yourself with God's promises. You are just keep telling yourself and dedicating certain scriptures of this is the future I'm promised. My family is a huge rock for me, so leaning on them emotionally and mentally. And aside from that, it's also just taking time out and also just seeing, are you aligned? I'm like, recently now, I think I still kind of am on a hiatus on social media. And this is at the beginning of the year, very, very intentional for me. This is when I'm quiet. I finished a project and I just want to hear what God wants me to do, So for me, being still and not being cluttered with a lot of noise helps. Because then I'm also not going to be doing things that are not aligned. And if I need to take a break, I need to take a break. But for me, just having that alignment gives me that peace of, I'll be good.
702.
The upside of failure.
Sometimes failure is the foundation of greatest success stories.
The upside of failure. Her name is Nambitha Ben-Mazwi, and I have to just tell you guys, we have been chasing this woman. It's been a while, but she's finally here. How are you doing?
I'm just so relieved to finally set foot here. At some point, it felt like it was cursed. I was like, no, but guys, every time I'm like, yay. And it's like, you realize you don't own your own life and time. But producers say, no, you've got a show to finish, And man, it's been also an amazing blessing and a journey to also lead one of its kind, Mpini, in action. So I'm grateful for it. I'm exhausted, but I'm so excited to finally touch base and also just be out. I feel like I've been working 6-day weeks, 14-hour days, and I haven't really touched base. Yeah.
And we're going to get a little bit into that project, and I almost feel like, when they feel like individuals came out of nowhere, I feel like you're one of those people who came out of nowhere and it was like, who is this woman? Who is this woman? And you are booked and busy, but we also know in real life, no one ever came from nowhere.
Absolutely.
This is not those stories of like, I was screaming at a bank teller and then a producer gave me a role.
I already know the shade. Okay, Miss Charlize.
And look, it's not to say I don't believe those stories happen, but they are 1 in a million stories of that. But in terms of just how your energy has been fire since the first time I have met you. I feel like we only see each other on red carpets. What's up with that?
I don't like that. It's actually our industry, and I'm trying to change it. I attended my first casting. It was the third week of January.
Yeah.
And it's the only time we get to see each other. And this casting brought out everyone from the woodworks. People I look up to that I've never met. Everyone was there. And we actually were just like, you know what? What are you doing after this? Let's just go for coffee. Very impromptu. And it was just almost just this very authentic, real sisterhood of where we're actually just feel seen and heard, and we're realizing that we're not alone in this. And that barely ever happens, and it was it's still a highlight for me. I still actually, it filled my cup so much, and I'm like, we need to do more of this. We need to connect more.
And the reason I agree with you, I was talking to an industry friend who has done international projects. She's done so much. And we were just sitting and lamenting the challenges of the industry. Rates are not the same. And like, on the one hand, you're so grateful for work. And then on the other hand, you're like, can we be paid a bit more? Can we, and how are you navigating those moments? Because looking booked and busy and being booked and busy in that it reflects in your bank account are not the same things.
No.
We, have got to take care of so many things on our own when you're not housed within a company that's like, there's a pension fund, there's a this, there's a this. How are you managing that? And what have you kind of learned from the OGs that you're like, okay, I'm definitely going to follow what they did or not follow what these people did?
You know what, the OGs have, I'm like a sponge. I take a little bit from there, I take a little bit of there. Some things I don't take. Some I say, okay, that's a lesson of what not to do, It's not been easy. I'm still growing. I'm still learning how to navigate that. But from the financial point of view, I've been blessed with my, education and background and corporate experience. So I studied business science. I have my honors in business science at UCT. I did a bit of corporate strategy. So I still treat myself as a business. I literally do quarterly reviews, and I give myself targets, and I say, okay, this is the strategy. And it's something I shared in the masterclass I did with Showmax. And I really that has helped me navigate in the sense of, okay, this is the time now to diversify your portfolio. This is the time now when it's quiet to leverage off of this brand and personal brand you built. Now it's time to do this. Now it's time to venture off on this. And then also the rates conversation. Oh, it is tricky because there's this fear of, if you speak out, you will be blacklisted, right?
Oh.
And I understand, from also now venturing into producing, I understand that producers want a return on investment. There's certain things that they need to look at the bottom line. And you also don't want to make the producer's life difficult. So it's a very, very hard balancing act, and also the more you grow, the more your boundaries are even higher, and now you also just need to learn emotional intelligence and how to also voice that, stand up for yourself, but also not rock the boat, and also protect yourself. So it's been building a team that, my agency, I need to feel safe in my agency. I have a lawyer, so I feel safe, always having that conversation. I have, someone who manages me holistically. And then obviously, finances, I've made sure I've gotten an RA and, now income protection because I had an injury. And that made me wake up. I was like, I could have not been able to work
What
ever.
injury did you have on this latest project?
Yes, I've been on a 6-month back rehabilitation.
What?
It's something I've not really spoken up too much about, but it wasn't a very unfortunate event, and it's something that that was a wake up, and this is the South African industry. I need to look after myself, and I need to look out for myself, and this is the environment we're in. So if I'm going to continue doing more actions, and necessarily I'm not always protected, and I can only voice so much without also rubbing
Rocking
too
the
many
boat.
feathers. But it's not my decision on how things are done at the end of the day. It was during the first stunt actually that we did. So it's a lesson that everyone learned. It was the production company's first time doing an action. It was the so it's also just one of those where it's like, what, no one's really out to hurt you, so it's okay. Let's grow from this. But what are the lessons I needed to learn? But it took a toll on me. It took a toll mentally, emotionally, physically, and I learned how to pull through pain and act through pain.
And I think it was on our finance feature last week that we touched on income protection. And I look at the number of individuals in our industry who have busy seasons, have quiet seasons, and then just the quiet season that's the season for an indefinite amount of time. And I always wonder if we're completely uninsured. But at the same time, those monthly bills are, they stack up, the income's not guaranteed. And I'm wondering for you, how do you mentally deal with that? Because we know the mental part is a big hurdle, especially feeling possibly like a frustrated creative. It's not like you're like, oh, I had 10 scripts on my desk and
I'm choosing.
I'm choosing what projects, So how do you manage? And you are young in the sense that our industry naturally categorizes women into what they are and how their appearance is. But how are you keeping your mind in the place it needs to be in for you to be productive, for you to be available to yourself, to hone your craft, but also to use, your qualification to say, hey, how am I going to treat myself like a business? What's next?
It changes every year. Honestly, the more you grow, the tougher the hurdles, the tougher the lessons, the tougher the pressure. And now you also want to level up. You don't. Certain things are no longer good enough anymore. So it's mentally for me. I'm a huge advocate of therapy. Huge advocate. Even just after just taking stock, when I've de-rolled, I take a de-rolling trip. After every project, when I de-roll out of that character, I know where I'm centered. It's either in the bush or under the ocean. I'm a diver. So I'll either just like do a diving trip to Mauritius, or I'll go to Delstrom, or, I'll go to Kruger, and I will literally just have time with me, myself, God. My spirituality and faith is of the utmost, because when I'm in the deepest trenches, it's almost like you are trying to brainwash yourself with God's promises. You are just keep telling yourself and dedicating certain scriptures of this is the future I'm promised. My family is a huge rock for me, so leaning on them emotionally and mentally. And aside from that, it's also just taking time out and also just seeing, are you aligned? I'm like, recently now, I think I still kind of am on a hiatus on social media. And this is at the beginning of the year, very, very intentional for me. This is when I'm quiet. I finished a project and I just want to hear what God wants me to do, So for me, being still and not being cluttered with a lot of noise helps. Because then I'm also not going to be doing things that are not aligned. And if I need to take a break, I need to take a break. But for me, just having that alignment gives me that peace of, I'll be good.
In terms of getting to a place where you understood that was something you needed, what was it that happened in your life that made you say, okay, that's it. I need to have these little pockets for me. And I'm asking this also selfishly because I still struggle with finding pockets for me, not necessarily finding the time in the calendar, but giving myself the permission to be present in that without the guilt of mom duties and I've still got a long to-do list. What was the thing that made you realize it's do or die? I have to take this out for myself.
Sure. I think for me, it's when my mental health depleted, like literally, panic attack, like you are burned. Like I remember my doctor, my chiro actually, because I haven't had a panic attack in a few years, but that was like, we just need to get a hold of everything now. But my chiropractor through the 6-month rehabilitation journey said to me, and I've it's a place called Holistics, and they believe in holistic health, So you had a biokineticist. They even will be like, okay, you maybe need we even have a dietitian, this therapist, that. And he said, you're a quarter to breakout. You've been through a lot. And because he's been rehabilitating my injury, he's seen literally what I go through, and how broken I have been. And he said, I'm worried about you, you're quarter to burnout. And I think that for me was a wake up, is when I couldn't show up for myself anymore. And you can't also pour from an empty cup. So I think it is nearing a burnout and nearing this panic attack of anxiety where you feel like you just want to do everything. And sometimes just taking that step back is so necessary, because how are you going to even pour to your own child?
Definitely. And it's a hard thing, but just because of how we've been conditioned, how we've been raised in general. Not every home is that way. But I think, like, I have the utmost respect for you having learned that about yourself so early on, prior to getting to the bigger ages where it becomes even harder, not just to teach the people around you about your boundaries, but to teach yourself about your boundaries. So how do you call yourself to order when you're not giving yourself grace, you're not being kind, you're not like, because you strike me as a very A-type personality. You need things done a certain way. And people like that, because I can connect so much, we become fixers to everybody else's problems and struggle to ask for help. So
I have like gone from like a C to now a B plus on that. So I'm proud of myself.
You're moving on up.
Yes. Yes. Oh no, I've gotten over that. I think the fixer part, that was one of my biggest lessons. And I get that inherently from my mother. And she's even said to me, you're helping me, and that was huge, and she was asking me for advice. I was like, okay. But
did it blow up in your face because there was a day where you did something, you went out of your way as you usually do, and then you realized, guys, I'm being taken for a bush.
It's also just like, I can't. Yes, I'm on this quest to change the world, but I'm not going to be able to serve the other young woman or young girl who looks up to me if I'm not okay. And you see it in your relationships first. It starts filtering into your work environment, your day-to-day, your relationships, your friendships. If you're not okay, it filters. And it's so cognitive and you're not aware of it, but people get affected around you. Suddenly you also find yourself, you're surrounded, isn't as suddenly there's just like a lot of distraction around you, or
and you don't like, feel settled.
Why is it like I'm always like coming across things that have no peace? And then you're like, no, wait a minute, because yes, our industry is so unstable and it's just this roller coaster, but there's such a beauty in finding so much peace and joy within that. Like there's moments where even my castmates and, ask me, like, dude, how are you like still so, like, how are you still laughing and keeping it going when I'm watching, we've been like front row seat watching what's been happening to you, and how are you doing this, And in that instance, and I learned a lot from Mbini, I learned how to lead from the back, being a lead is not on camera. I got to a point where I sat down and I was like, let me open a WhatsApp group. I started team buildings. We're as close as anything. We're done shooting, but we're still relying on each other so much. We're like, okay, guys, let's go to a shooting range. Let's go do this.
You made a little community.
I started, organizing these team buildings because honestly, we only have each other to lean on. And we went through a lot. And that for me has been, this is community. I found a sense of community, and that really helps me, and realizing that you're not alone, man.
What was happening when you decided to move to New York? Like, I need to know the tea. I need to know the story, because it seems like such an obvious thing, like, if anybody has an opportunity to go to New York, they'd go. But like, there's so much more to it. But what were the circumstances for you?
You know that movie, Eat, Pray, Love by Julia Roberts? I mean, I think we all have that as like, I just wish I could just go to Italy and West Europe and just find myself. And I was still young. I was 22, I think, 22, 23. And, it's funny because now I'm going through another internal kind of reflection, and I can feel myself going through a shift currently. And, recently, Fresh on his podcast said to me, have you suddenly become measured? And I realized I have. Whereas that 23-year-old ballsy didn't care, had nothing to lose, made the most boldest moves. That came from me just leaving corporate and being inspired by
Because you were
a
you
best
were in a
friend then.
job
I
at
was
the time.
I was living in Camps Bay. I was comfortable.
Like you had a whole proper job. You were in corporate,
Yeah.
living your best life.
Yeah.
What was the thing that said, you know what? What was that thing that
Well,
happened?
it was best life, right? I wasn't fulfilled. It was that simple, and I can't talk about the story without mentioning Golinhleko. She was my best friend for such a long time then, and she called me, and I was late at night in the office, which is normal. I had no life. It was just I was always in the office, and what was different for me that I realized, and she said, "Listen, I'm leaving. I'm moving to Firenze. I'm going to pursue design. I got into the Florence School of Design, and I spoke to my dad, who's quite like staunch corporate, Putuma, and he's just like, but this is, and
Yeah.
it wasn't an easy conversation, but she's like flourishing now, pursuing her passion. And she said out of nowhere, she's like, Nam, I know what's in your heart and you're damn good at it. Go for it. You'll kill it. And I was just like, girl, I thought this conversation was about you just telling me you're
Yeah.
leaving the country. But seeing her make that bold move inspired me. And I just also knew that there's something missing. Even while I was studying business science, I was still, I had UCT radio. I hosted the World Cup. So I was still dabbling in the arts, while I was still, pushing business science. And now I'm full on corporate. There's no time to go to castings or do a commercial or MC or really just do what I thought was a hobby. There's definitely no time to do a stage production. I knew theater would be gone bye-bye. That was a high school thing. But I realized that I'm not fulfilled and there's something missing. And also, I've always said to myself, I know I have a lot. I'm destined to make an impact and change the world. I thought I was going to do it through corporate, but I knew this is not the way I'm going to do it. And I negotiated a good package, resigned. I
Wait,
had already
a resignation
Yes.
package, ma'am?
Girl, you got to be smart with your things,
Yes.
Like, it's something that was at least going to, hold me off for like a 2-3 months. And because, with the company, I had already said I would like to, I had aspirations to move to the New York office. New York was always a place I had wanted to go to and gain experience in. Then I thought it was because it's the maker of digital marketing
Yes.
and I wanted to learn more about that field. And I still thought that that's what I was doing there. I was still actually, lining up, jobs and trying to see what I can do on LinkedIn, what I can find with recruitment companies. But also at the same time, I met, my roommate's friend, Ilan Komets. He used to work as a producer for 10 years in New York, for your big stations. And we sat down, had coffee, and, my roommate linked us up and said, talk to him. I'm sure he can give you a few
Wait,
contacts.
so is this when you were already...
Cape Town.
Oh,
No,
still
this
in
is
Cape Town. Oh, my
yes.
gosh.
So this is now I've resigned. I'm kind of just like, going for my little walks and beach runs, and I just don't know. And I've got a roommate, and they were like, listen, my friend, if you want to go to New York, because I wanted just a break. I wanted to figure things out. I had no plan yet. But he then literally after that coffee date, I thought he was going to give me like 1 or 2, leads. He gave me, being my A type, I had my, A4 notebook and pen, and I'm like going to a little coffee meeting. And we sat there for such a long time. And he gave me a good 2 pages, 2 or 3
Wow.
pages of just leads from like the VP of ABC to this, to this.
Wow.
And he said, I want you to get there and I want you to cold call these people and drop my name and say you're a very good friend of Ilan Komets. And yes, they might shrug you off, but don't stop until you solidify a lunch date with one of them. They have to meet you. And then we need to try and get you on television. This is what we're going to do. So I ended up doing that. I ended up on Viewpoint Live. It's very embarrassing. The interview's still on YouTube. Like my weave looks a hot mess. Like, you know what I mean? It's just like, I girl. But I ended up on, on Viewpoint Live being interviewed. And that's really where things started. And on my 10th day there, it was a 2-week holiday. I decided I'm not going to come back. So 2 weeks turned into 6 months.
Oh no, you need to pause right there.
yeah.
You need to pause right there in the story because we need to know why. 22 minutes to 3 o'clock on the upside of failure. We are having a conversation with Nambitha Ben-Mazwi, who really for me has such a fascinating story. And if you've just joined us, we're about to pick up from her sharing her journey of how she quit her job in corporate and decided to go to New York. So a friend of a friend sat with her, gave her some leads, and now she was deciding while living in Cape Town what the what next is, which is a very scary but also exciting place to be. 011 8830702, the WhatsApp line 0727021702. So you decide to head off there to say, let me book for 2 weeks.
It was
and
a
just
2-week
see.
trip. And I remember my flight back return was on Christmas Day at 3 p.m., which is my mother's birthday. She's a Christmas
Oh my
baby.
goodness.
So it was also an awkward conversation to navigate, and wake her up. It was an ungodly hour for her at the time. And to tell her, listen, I'm actually considering staying. I bought 2 months of my time. Like, I think I extended. I had a free flight change. So I was like, oh, okay. When things are just aligning, when God is moving. Because honestly, the favor I got from absolute strangers who've become now like family has been, things were just working out way too well, man, And then when I realized and I looked at my visa and I said, oh, I've actually got a full 6 months, and I changed my flight again. So I changed my flight twice. And it was just, for me, it was me networking my way, really. So he introduced me to obviously all those leads, and I started cold calling, which is something I'd learned from Meltwater Group where I had worked. So I remember the first 2 days I was a tourist. I was staying at a friend's place. I had met him at UCT. He was an exchange student, right? So he lives Upper East Side. He says, yeah, come through. So accommodation wasn't an issue. It was now when I've realized that I actually want to stay longer. Now I'm going to sublet. Now I need to make money. How am I going to do this? So from also another friend, Sherad Ahmad, he does startups and he frequents New York a lot. So he introduced me to this girl called Nicole Rose Stillings, who's still been like a friend of mine till this day. And she used to organize these weekly events called Champagning, and where a group of 20-somethings meet every week from all walks of life to have champagne and network. Literally, that's it. So that group literally is what then helped me find and navigate a lot of my friends. And one girl was like, hey, listen, we want you to stay longer. What can you do? And I was like, well, I need to obviously make money and be able to live. So she's like, my friend just opened a comedy club called The Stand on Gramercy. I'm sure you can find something to do there. So we went, she introduced me. Long story short, Paola Italia's like, yeah, don't worry about it. We got you. And I ended up, starting off as like front desk and hosting there. And that became, well, I shouldn't say this on air, but that helped me, get a bit more pocket money to sublet and live every single day. So I was working at the Stand Comedy Club, and that really was my sustenance while I figured out who I am.
So what made you say, okay, New York, I'm done with you. I need to go back home?
I wasn't done with New York.
Oh, really?
I still am not done with New York. It was okay, now that I know that when I put caution to wind and I had to rely on my natural strengths, and that was my love for broadcasting and the arts. And that's what I did. And I was like, and I saw how people responded well to me there. I was like, I was the happiest I've ever been. And I think it was more just for me to realize, come back. And I had made a promise to myself for that trip. I said, well, obviously I didn't want to be deported. So I don't want to overstay my visa, let's make sure we're doing things by the book. So I left because of that. But it was from this day forward, I'm going to stay true to myself no matter what. And I'm going to pursue a career in the arts. months. I did not know how yet, but I knew that after that 6 months where all I just did was host and be on television and go to these events and do this and be surrounded by all these creatives, it was like, this is what I should be doing, you know? So from then onwards is when I started to really navigate. And then the business scientist was like, okay, step one, we're going to move to Joburg. Then I
Yes.
started like doing things like presenter search on 3
Yes.
and this. And then I was like, okay, now let's move to Joburg. Let's assess the market. Let's not do this. Let's introduce ourselves, you know, as an actor first, because there's typecasting. Let's say no
Right.
to presenting gigs. Let's do this. So that's when the strategist started formulating a plan and build an international reel. That was my go-to, build an international reel. So that's when I got Black Mirror, the US one. Then I was like, okay, because the plan for me was to always go back, you know, and do a lot more international work. And that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying I ain't done.
The
with New York.
beauty is that it's never too late. I mean, remember the actress who was in Black Panther?
Yes.
Started her career in her 80s. And anything really, really is possible. One of the things that you have spoken about, and I know is just such a challenge for so many women, is you dealing with endometriosis, and it's very, very difficult and challenging. Just in terms of how you got through that, knowing that so many women walk around not even diagnosed, they don't even know.
Yeah.
Then when they are diagnosed, sometimes they don't have all the correct information or support. But from your experience, what is really your biggest key takeaway from going through all of that in 2020?
Sure. That was the most difficult. Well, not anymore. I've had more difficult things that I've had to battle, but then at the time it was insane. You know, it's lockdown and you're going through this excruciating pain, but you don't know what's going on to your body. And you know, all I had at the time was my then boyfriend, you know, and it was just also not understanding why is this pain not stopping. And also as women, we know our bodies. And it's so important to always listen to your body, man. Even when you are just... And endometriosis is an illness that also, if you're surrounded by toxicity, it's aggravated. So you got to take care of your environments, your mental health. And that's why I'm so high boundary and protective of that, you know, because that can cause a flare-up.
Right?
So I also realized that, you know, my surroundings, the people I am surrounded by are not really helping. It's actually, I've been in a toxic environment. And when I also then went to my gynae for my annual checkup, and then I went and I said, listen, something's wrong. You know, I didn't typically present with all the ticks of the side effects. Well, not the side effects, but
all the signs and symptoms that
signs
would
and
point to the
symptoms.
diagnosis. Yeah.
Yes, but there were some, right? And I thank my gynae till this day that, you know, a lot of women go through dismissive doctors who just dismiss it as painful periods. Some women have died from just being misdiagnosed or completely just tarnished away, particularly women of color. And, you know, for him to also just listen and be like, okay, because the only way to diagnose this is through surgery, you've got to also be very attentive as a specialist and make sure that you're not going to just cut someone up if you're not 90% sure it is endometriosis, right? So it really is it's a thing of being in tune with your patient and really just understanding them, and also just saying, okay, here's some painkillers, see how you respond in a week, tell me what's going on. And he gave me like Schedule 6s, you know. I responded, but at the end of it, it was a Schedule 6, but he started me off slow, and I was like, I'm not responding. I'm still in pain, and the pain is shooting down my leg, and it's like I'm limping, and it doesn't stop. It's not only when I'm on my period, you know. And that's when he was like, this is not normal, you know. He thinks it might be endometriosis. He educated me on it. And, I got diagnosed with stage 1, thankfully, and that's what I'm so grateful for is, I listened to my body. I caught it at the early stages. My doctor, and I want women to insist, like periods are not supposed to make you bedridden, to the point where you are in a fetal position on your bathroom floor, which I found myself in when I was shooting How to Ruin Christmas. During lockdown, it was shortly after surgery. I had barely healed, and we're also all shooting in a quarantine. So we were, booked into this hotel, cast, crew, production, and that's it. We couldn't go home for 6 weeks. You just had your apartment and your hotel room, and I've had very, 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 very difficult moments on that set, and owing to my illness. So for me, healing, going through that, because we were quarantined, I couldn't go home. So my mom is like, come home and do the surgery. And it was emergency surgery. So it's like, no visitors, nothing.
And I think for the many things that happened in 2020, we always look at it as, lockdown is happening, but we forget that real life is also happening in the background. People were going to hospital for other reasons, praying they're not catching COVID and so many other things. We take another break. When we come back, we continue. I clock the upside of failure as we have a conversation with award-winning actress, entrepreneur, as well as, I would say, a budding globetrotter of note and activist, Nambitha Ben-Mazwi, though you might find her on the socials as Lady Num, that everybody calls her. 011 883 0702 and the WhatsApp line 072 702 1702. With this conversation around the endometriosis and what you have been through with your back injury, and all of these various experiences, if you look at yourself as Nambitha, a little girl, a child, what did you understand failure to mean and to be?
As a child or now?
Sorry, let's get the mic on. Yes?
As a child or now?
So as a child, from the perspective of 5-year-old you, and then we will chat later about you now. Yeah.
I grew up with a hardworking family, parents who expected the best, particularly mom. Sorry, mom. Very, very critical mother. Okay. Yeah. Bless her heart. I would come home from school with 9 out of 10. And she'd be like,
where's the other one?
One. Yeah, Eva.
Listen.
Because standard it was. And I understand why she did that, because she could see my potential. She knew how smart I was. You know what I mean? And if I actually just do the work and I became that straight A student. So for me, failure, I took it so hard. It was when I'm not getting that straight A.
So it was very linked to things that are measured.
Absolutely.
So are marked, are measured, because art is very subjective.
Do you understand how I am it's almost like my right and my left brain are always constantly in conflict. My creative side allows me a break to just be and explore and give and be vulnerable and not be measured, and just also allow that everything goes, and there's gray areas and there's beauty in the unknown and the uncertainty. And I find that beauty so much. And then the left side is like, it's black and white. It is logical. It is either right or wrong, and I found a way to find that balance now. But as a child, it was either you make first team hockey team, either you come back with a gold from the Ice Stedfords, it's either you get that lead solo on the musical, it's either you get those straight A's and you are in the top 10 of your class, or you have failed.
So how have you managed to unlearn and let me actually say, because I think unlearning, we use that terminology incorrectly, because you are rewiring
It's
yourself.
reprogramming almost.
Yeah, reprogramming. How have you been able to do that?
Sure.
Because we know that's not a healthy way to live.
Yes, absolutely. It's been finding my identity in Christ and falling in love with myself, man. Therapy, inner child work, and also my craft has actually been the best therapy of it all. You know, getting to delve into storytelling and finding and studying people and realizing that there's so much beauty in just everything, you know, and me going into these different characters, as vastly different as they are, and really stripping them and saying, okay, take the onion layers off. What is at the core? You know, what are these person's fears, dreams, insecurities, doubts, and then finding, because that's where the best creativity comes from, is truth. Finding truth in who we are as humans and being brave enough to showcase that. And that's probably why every single time I get a new character, I go into a hiatus, because I have to dig very deep and be so honest with myself, you know, and be so raw and go into parts that are very scary at times, that are very uncomfortable, and sometimes tap into very dark areas of myself. So being brave enough to do that in order to really tell truthful stories. And I actually got to share this when I was invited to host at Essence Film Festival in New Orleans last year. And, you know, there was the subject and we spoke about that and being brave enough to tap into that, because we were basically focusing on our diaspora, right? Obviously, Essence is all about Black excellence and really telling our own stories as an African diaspora ourselves and taking ownership of our own stories rather than, let's say, the West or other diasporas
I hate
telling
to
them.
do this because when
Okay.
time runs
All
out.
right. You
So,
asked me these questions, girl.
Final sentence for leave the listeners and myself with what you've learned about failure.
Failure is just an opportunity to learn a lesson, and it could be the key to your breakthrough.
She said it. Upside of failure. Nambitha, Ben-Mazwi.
702.
The upside of failure.
Sometimes failure is the foundation of greatest success stories.